Owen O'Kane, I am delighted to have you on the podcast as a colleague and a peer. You're on what I call my expert episode, and you're a psychotherapist, a former palliative care specialist, and an ex-NHS clinical lead for mental health. What else do we need to know about you kind of personally before you talk to us about
Well,
anxiety?
thank you for having me, by the way. It's lovely to be here, and I'm sure we'll have a great chat today. But my career was split in two. So the first half was in health, and most of that was palliative care. And that's then led to the kind of psychology training because to be honest,
So you were a nurse in palliative
yeah,
care.
palliative care specialist nurse, did that for a long time. And then realized that a lot of what we were up against was psychological distress. And I didn't feel equipped to deal with that very often. You would do the basics, but I just didn't know how to dive into deeper stuff. And that kind of motivated me to do the psychotherapy training. And at the time, actually, I was in the NHS and they were supporting people to go off and do a master's in a discipline that supported their practice. So when I approached them about it, they said, you can't do that. It's not relevant to the
You're
subject area.
joking.
Yeah. And I said, all right, okay. And ironically, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, the head of education at the time in the trust I worked in came to me and she said, I think you should appeal that decision because I think what you're asking to do is very relevant to your line of
Yeah.
work. So she said, appeal it, just find the evidence on why it would support your work in palliative care. And that's exactly what I did. And I appealed it and they then let me go off and do my master's in psychotherapy. And that was an entire new world for me to start thinking and working in a different way. And long story short, then my interest in that area really started to develop and I started to build my career, trained in different disciplines, worked my way up the ladder and eventually then became an NHS clinical lead for mental health and did that job.
That's a big
Massive job.
achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was a massive job. The interesting thing about, I think, my career, I've genuinely never really planned it out too much. There's never been a
Me
strategy.
neither. No.
Yeah, I've never really planned to get to clinical lead level. In fact, I don't think I'm naturally manager material, but I was good at it.
Because you're
And I
good
could,
with people.
yeah, I like people and I loved the job. And I really believed in trying to get as many people treatment as possible. So I did enjoy that end of the work. And then long story short, I then thought, yeah, I'm getting older. I want to start thinking about diversifying my career, but I don't want to be in a big job for the rest of my career. So I started doing a bit more private work, started doing some talks and I was creating workshops on anxiety and I created a technique at the time was just teaching people 10 minutes out of their day, not just kind of like 10 minutes of breathing, but I created this kind of concept of how do you quieten the mind?
Brilliant.
How do you steady? How do we use the psychology, the neuroscience?
Self-regulate in
Yeah, all the
trade
time.
terms.
Yeah, because you're doing all these therapy groups in the NHS and you realize a lot of people don't know how to do this stuff.
Mm.
So anyway, I then bizarrely, all very random, got an opportunity. I was doing a talk in the BBC one day and someone randomly
As
said,
one does,
as
just,
you do. And that was another random introduction. Someone knew somebody and said, oh, will you go in and do a talk? And somebody at that talk come up and said, oh, you need to write a book on what you're talking about. I think people would be interested because I've never really just worked from my clinical experience, whether that be medical or psychotherapy. But as a human being, I do get struggle. I understand that my own background was traumatic. Grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. There was all of that. I was a gay guy, which was very difficult coming out in Ireland at the time. So I'd always made a decision that I was never going to park that. I wasn't going to be the guru, the expert, the person who had it all together. I kind of got trauma and anxiety, the two areas that I personally get.
Can I pause you and invite you just so that we have the kind of personal connection with you? Because you said it very fast. Northern Ireland, the
That's me
Troubles,
trying to avoid
gay.
it. That's me avoiding the
Yeah.
trauma.
Mm. Can you, even now, decades later, can you connect internally to how that trauma is experienced in you? I mean, were you Catholic, Protestant?
I grew up
Yeah,
Catholic,
Catholic.
which is that's another level of shame when you're Catholic. I don't know if you're Catholic or not, but I mean, I just kind of think Catholicism brings,
A lot of guilt.
yeah, lots of guilt, lots of shame. I mean, I actually went into a monastery for 3 years. So
Did you?
in my late teens, I was in a monastery for 3 years, which I never regret doing. I trained to be a Catholic priest for 3 years. And at the time, I was young, but I grew
Did
up
you
in a
know
very,
you were gay then?
I had a hunch. I was the king of denial. I was very good at pushing stuff down because you had to.
You had no choice. It was
You
the
had
only
to.
mechanism available. Yeah.
Absolutely. So to survive it all, really, the trauma itself of all the violence and the bombs and the awfulness of the situation.
The unpredictability that you just didn't know
Yeah.
where, when, what.
And I grew up in a place
Terror.
called Ardowing. So it was in
Yes.
like we were in the heart of it. So we were
Yeah.
literally on this crossfire of awfulness a lot of the time.
Permanent threat, wasn't
Oh,
it?
absolutely. Total permanent threat. But when you're in it, you don't realize that. You just normalize it so much. It was only when I moved to London and I kind of got away, literally, for my own sake, really. And I love the people there and I love the country, but I needed to go. And when I got away, I realized how abnormal it was because you're in this elevated sense of threat. So that was a big part of it. So that was only at one level, though. That was the kind of the sectarian violence stuff. So that elevated threat. But then, of course, being a little gay kid who at some level knew there was a difference, and I was playing piano, the other kids were out playing football, and the other kids targeted. So they swatted
They
it.
smelt it in you.
There were 4 of us who knocked around together at school. And we, of course, no shock. We all turned out to be gay.
That's a book.
Yeah, we found each other, and that was never mentioned. We never talked about it. We didn't even know what it meant, but we found each other. But we were all of us badly bullied in different ways, so that was another level of threat.
Yeah, terrible.
So religion, in a way, became, there was a big church near where I lived, and I found it quite peaceful going there. And my family were quite religious, and my mum, particularly when she was alive, was very, throw holy water over you, all that stuff. And she moved well, but my bedroom had the crucifixes, the Virgin Mary with eyes that would light up, watching you in bed. All of this
Oh my
stuff.
God.
Yeah, it was all of that stuff. So
She wouldn't have approved of you being gay.
Well, I managed to come out to my mum before.
Oh, did
before
you?
she died, yeah, which was really interesting for Irish Catholic parents. She gave me a whole list of, when I come out to her, I said, because I come out, when I come out of the monastery, I literally then came out.
Right, okay.
2 days later. So,
Wow.
they thought they had a future pope one day. And 2 days later, they've got a gay son.
It's a bit of a disappointment from their perspective.
It was a bit of a transition for them. And
how did she take it? Because we've had somebody on the podcast whose mother never spoke to them about it again. They still love them.
Well, I'll tell you the fascinating. I'm going to fast forward to answer that question.
We will talk about anxiety, by the way, but we just need to get your backstory.
This is all part of it, really, I guess.
Yeah.
It feeds into it. But I'm going to fast forward to the question about my mum, because my mum died young. She died at 57 of breast cancer. And when she died, at her funeral, someone called the family home, and I picked up the phone, and this lady had an English accent, and I didn't recognize who she was. And she said, "Oh, you must be Owen." And I went, "Yeah." And she said, "I heard about your mum, and I really wanted to ring and offer condolences, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but I don't know who you are." And then she said, "Oh, your mum was my support worker." And I went, "Oh," so I thought it was one of the cancer networks. And I went, "All right, okay." I said, "Do you have breast cancer as well?" And she went, No. She said, "I have a gay son."
Oh my goodness me.
And your mum was my support worker. And she said she was so helpful because her husband had rejected their son and thrown him out. So anyway, I come off this call. The lady was lovely. And I said to my dad, I said, "What's this about the gay support worker parent thing?" And he went, "Oh," he said, "Did you never know about that?" I said, "She's been at that for about 10 years. She does 2 nights a week. She's up there for about 4 hours on the phone to people from all over the world, talking to them about having a gay son." So the beginning was tricky. When I first came out to her, I said, "Look, I just come out of the monastery. I told a really close friend that I was coming out, literally and metaphorically, of the monastery, and then coming out. And within a day, my brother rang me and he said, 'Have you got something to tell me?' And no one in the world knew at this point. And the friend that
No one in the world knew.
no one, not a single person.
You'd only just let yourself know.
I'd only just let myself know. And I'd never spoken the words to anyone except this one friend. And within 24 hours, my brother got to find out, because the one friend that I told someone else, who told my brother's wife, and then my brother rang me. So he then said, "You're going to have to tell mum and dad because they're going to find out." So I was almost forced to come out very, very quickly. And when I
Right.
sat my mum down, I said, look, I've got something I need to talk to you about. She said, are you in trouble with money? Now, considering I'd just come out of a monastery 24 hours beforehand,
You couldn't gamble there, could you?
the list of possibilities. So she then said, are you in trouble with money? Are you taking drugs? I mean, the possibility list was hilarious, considering the
Have you
context.
made someone pregnant?
Have you made someone pregnant?
Did she actually say that?
Yeah, that was on the list. Even better, she said, are you involved with a Protestant?
That's the worst of the worst.
Oh, well, that would have been the worst. And so anyway, there was this list of possibilities. And then interestingly, the very last thing she said was, oh, don't tell me you're gay. So she worded it differently. So I said, actually, that is it, actually. And there was a warm but a neutral. She wasn't quite sure what to do. And then she told a story about there are 4 boys in the family. And when I was born, she said, I knew there was a difference, but I could never pinpoint
Quite
what it
put what
was.
it was.
There
So
was a
instinctively she felt it.
instinctive different feeling that I just couldn't quite connect, but I knew there was something different to you than the other 3 boys, and I didn't know what it was. So anyway, she then brought my dad down, and my dad was a builder. He's still alive, and he's great with it. He gets on with it, but he did this kind of classic Irish father, wasn't really thinking about the response, and he went, "Oh, don't worry, it's a phase. We all go through it." I know he didn't mean that, but the way he
No.
worded it at the time, my mum was like the exorcist. I remember her head spinning, thinking, "Oh, do we now?" And I knew what he meant. He just said, "Oh, people go through these phases and they think they are." And he said, "You're not." And then he said, "I know gay people and I've seen them on the TV and they're
You're not
different."
gay.
I think it's all
Yeah.
of that. Carry on. So anyway, they adjusted. My partner comes back to
They're
Ireland.
remarkable. Your mother's was a remarkable woman.
Do you know what I have to remember, Julia? And it's really, really important. It took me a long time. I was 23 when I came out. So it took me most of my formative years and early adult life to come to grips with it. And I think truth telling and honesty, it's not always realistic to expect the other people to be able to meet you.
Where you're at. Yeah, it takes time.
They need a
Catch
bit
up.
of time and adjustment. And I know people who would be more militant would say, well, love is love and people have to accept, but people also have their own stories and their background.
Yeah, and their own fears.
And fears around it as well. So anyway, they got there, but that was just another level of threat. So in short, the entire experience was a lot of fear. I wouldn't have used that language. I wouldn't have talked about being anxious. I was just a kid who was getting on with it, functioning, getting through, managing, happy-go-lucky in many ways, and just
Sweet kid. I can see you as a little kid
yeah,
playing the piano.
yeah, it wasn't
Mm.
complicated, you know what I mean? And I had good friends. You know, the kids who were able to integrate with me, I had good friends. I have 3 brothers. I got on well with them. They were protective in different ways. But it was
Did you
only when
forgive your friend for breaking your trust?
I
I
sort
feel cross with him.
I sort of got. It was a girl actually, and I sort of got why it happened
Okay.
as well because I think there was some disappointment around my revelation,
Oh, she wanted to date you.
potentially.
So she was angry.
So I think it was more
So
of
she was
a
acting out
he
a bit.
needed somewhere to go with the content.
Oh, so she was upset.
Yeah, so that sort of was the background story.
The link I was going to make is that there's the almost cartoon version of therapists that all therapists are walking wounded and that we come into this business to heal our own wounds and hopefully along the way we support other people. And I think that's very simplistic. But from what I understand from what you're saying is that from the kind of depth and heart of your experience is a kind of real knowledge that means that you're very empathic with other people because you have felt these deep fears. You have felt that kind of lack of trust of yourself almost into who you were finally going to be.
Yeah.
And that, although it was not a kind of straightforward, I want to be a therapist and change the world, but you wanted to make a difference. You wanted to help people because often I think we give other people what we most didn't get ourselves. You wanted to help people in the way you hadn't been helped yourself.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably it in a nutshell. I mean, I I never really thought too much about, look, you don't have to be Freud to work out. I was making choices in my career. I was going off to be a priest. Then I became a nurse as a palliative care specialist. So, of course, was there some unconscious desire to do good, to prove my worth, to prove my value? I'm sure there was, but
And to
actually,
God, maybe
yeah,
unconsciously.
potentially, because I didn't want to be a bad person. I wanted to be a decent human being. But actually, fundamentally, outside of all of that, what I've realized over the years is that I like people. I've always, always, always liked people. I'm fascinated by people. I love conversation. I love stories. I love getting underneath the skin of people
Yeah, me
and the
too.
complexity and the messiness of the human condition. So I guess even though part of my story might have informed some of my decision making, I actually do think sometimes, because I do genuinely get trauma and I genuinely get anxiety. With this book, with Addicted to Anxiety, I have said from the outset that it was the book that I wish someone had given me when I was 20.
Yeah. Let's talk about anxiety. And should we start with the title, Addicted to Anxiety? Because those two words are unusual together. Normally, we kind of want to get away from anxiety and drop anxiety. And so tell me about that.
It was a big decision. I mean, I knew it was going to be an anxiety book and I knew what I was going to talk about.
And statistically, anxiety is, I think, probably the highest reason for people seeing mental health
Yeah,
professionals.
the recent reports are showing that it's probably the highest presentation. If you screen people using all of the PHQ and GAD questionnaires and stuff, I think it's the one where people are showing most symptoms. So a lot of people who even traditionally wouldn't have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, I think if we randomly screen people on the street, what we're discovering is a lot of people would meet clinical criteria for anxiety. And I think we both know there's a number of reasons for that. The state of the world, post-pandemic, wars, threat,
Economic.
economy, everything. It's a multitude of things, but I think we are a more anxious population group. So I decided this is where I'm seeing the greatest need clinically. I would love to write not just a typical anxiety book, but I kind of think this is the one area that I really get. And I don't want to write about anxiety as this anecdotal, physiological, this is something happening to you, because I believe we all carry parts. And I think many of us carry scared little people within us
Yes.
who have been around for a long time. And often
Yes.
we don't know how to manage them.
No.
And I think the scared person within us, the anxious part of self, I think can often be very dominant and very loud and very persistent, maybe more so than some of the other parts. And learning to
It's
navigate that,
interesting.
learning
Because they have to, right?
they
So
have
sort
to,
of from evolutionary purposes, threat, you have to make a noise to say, watch out, danger is coming.
absolutely. But even greater than that, I would say you have to make noise to survive. So I thought, I don't want to write about this in a very clinical sector. I really want to talk about getting to know the anxious self. Look, without boring you too much with the details, there was a birth moment to this book many years ago in the NHS, and I was running an anxiety group. And this was a group of 12 people who had been around the block, done lots of various treatments. And the lead psychiatrist in my trust at the time knew that I had a particular interest in anxiety, but knew I also had a good success rate with anxious clients. They did well. I don't like that term, but clients did well.
Yeah.
They did well. And he said, I'd love you to set up a group for people who have sort of
I
been
think
given up.
groups are very underutilized.
Oh
They're
my God.
so helpful and so useful.
Oh, incredible. One of the services I worked in my earlier career, I set up their group therapy program there.
Oh, good for you.
It took us 2 years to do, which was fascinating.
Wow.
And so when we called the groups clinical, when we called that managing your anxiety, managing your depression, no one came. But we changed the titles to boost your mood, heart and manage your
That's
worry.
how you frame it.
When we took those kind of less clinical terms away, people got interested.
Less stigmatized.
In that group, interestingly, it was about 7-8 weeks in, and they were doing remarkably well. It was just one of those groups, good camaraderie. And about 8 weeks in, I fed back to him that I noticed improvement. And when I was feeding it back to him, there was this deadly, deadly silence in the room,
Hush.
which had created this new fear about them improving. So I said to him, look, I've noticed the moment I've mentioned recovery and people starting to move forward and the group feeling healthier and better, it was the quietest they'd ever been.
So
And
interesting.
one of the guys in the group piped up and he said, "That's quite scary." And I said, "What frightens you about it?" And then he was great, this guy. So he was an ex-drug addict. And he said, "Look, I've done drugs for years and I know what it's like to get clean. And I know what it's like to let go." He said, "It's hard to let go of an addiction." And he said, "But it's bloody scary to think of letting this go." And then he joked and he said, "I think I'm bloody more hooked on anxiety than I am
On heroin or
on
whatever.
heroin." And the group all laughed. Every one of them laughed.
But there
So
was a
they all got it.
collective
It
understanding.
was a collective understanding. But the interesting thing is I also got it. So as a human being, I also got what he was saying. And I can remember thinking at that moment, and this was way back, there is an addictive component to this because the kind of, in a nutshell, when I was developing the title, every addiction comes with a promise,
Yeah.
so drugs, drink,
You'll feel better.
you'll feel better, you'll numb out, you'll soothe, you'll avoid, whatever. So every addiction, wherever it is, comes with a promise of soothing in some
So the
way.
intention is to make you feel better,
So
avoid
to make you
pain.
feel better. And I think if you think of anxiety as a mechanism comes with a really strong promise of keeping you safe and preventing harm. So there's something about that anxiety mechanism that's quite alluring and quite
Yeah.
tantalizing, even though it bloody feels awful.
Yeah, and contaminates all the kind of happy, calm, creative feelings and connection to yourself and other people. Anxiety
Yeah.
blocks all the things that make us feel most alive and vital.
But if it's promising in the background the whole time, but this is what you need, this is what's going to keep you safe, this is going to stop you getting humiliated, this is going to stop you feeling.
So do you
this.
think it's a part? Do you think it's like a manager in internal family systems?
I think it's I think it's almost a protector part that is very, very organized, very strategic, very, very cunning, very powerful, way more than we recognize. And I guess that was the addictive component of it, because when you're working with clients, I'm sure you would identify in a similar way. Trying to get them to let go of these patterns can be a real challenge, because it's almost like there's a risk in letting go.
One of the things I often say is, what is it in this pattern that works for you, and what is the fear of this pattern? If you let go of this pattern, that you'll lose.
What would happen?
What would happen?
Exactly. So in that moment, I sort of thought about, we never talk about anxiety in the context of addiction, but what a helpful way to think about it, because actually we do get hooked. We do get hooked on the thoughts. We get hooked on the emotions that come with it, because the chemicals we produce in the body during anxiety are
Cortisol.
similar to the chemicals that are produced during an episode of excitement. So even chemically, there is a kind of attachment to the fact that a rush and an expectancy for, in big moments, I need that anxiety to protect me and keep me safe. The behaviors, as we know, all of the safety behaviors that we engage with to try and keep anxiety at bay, they become very, very addictive. So I started to formulate in my head, there is a really strong component of addiction to the process of anxiety. So that was the birth of the book.
So now tell me how you bloody fix it.
So that, how do you fix it? I mean, in a nutshell.
Yeah, I like nutshells.
The simplest answer would be, if we recognize that we are addicted to the process of anxiety, then the key is becoming
So is that acknowledging it?
I think it's an acknowledgement to first, so it has to be an acknowledgement of it. One of the earlier chapters in the book, I talk about meeting your anxious self. So that the first chapter is a willingness to go towards that part of self.
Yes, it's that paradox thing that what you most want to avoid is actually the thing you need to walk towards.
Yeah. And when I'm working with a client and I kind of phrase that with them.
So do you get them to visualize it?
I do it in a number of ways. In fact, I did something recently with someone, and I handed them a pillow. And I said to them, if this were your anxious self,
what would you do with it?
I said, tell me what you are doing with it. So he lifted the pillow and he started to bang it. He threw it on the ground and he stamped on it. He threw it to the other side of the room. And he laughed, and I said, can you see what may be happening there? I mean, that's literally what you're doing with that part of self.
Attacking it, beating it,
beating it up, suppressing it, throwing it away, avoiding it. And I said, if we think about this even more simplistically, if we saw a child who was suffering or struggling,
Mm.
our instinct wouldn't be to do any of those things. Our instinct would
Yeah.
be to go over and soothe. That would be
Yeah.
the natural
Pull them
instinct.
in. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the anxious self, the key thing has to be one, a willingness to recognize that this is real. It's not an imagined thing. I don't think we can talk about anxiety like it's a kidney or a pancreas or a body part. I think it's more nuanced. I think it's got more essence. It's got more life. It's got more energy to it. You can't relate to it that mechanical way. You've got to relate to it as a part of you.
Sensations.
The sensations, the
But
the
also the
function.
story you tell yourself about those
Yeah.
sensations.
Well, my
Yeah.
anxious self, when I got to know it, my anxious self got me through. And I never framed it that way. I mean, my anxious self
It
was,
worked for you in a way.
it had to, but it was there. Now, of course, the interesting thing about getting to know this anxious self is that unless you get to know it and you relate to it with compassion and kindness and all of the stuff that we talk about, unless we re-educate it, unless we give it the information that it's okay for it to stand down, then it will come back over and over and over again.
Because emotions are there to transmit information. If they keep getting suppressed, they keep coming back up.
They will keep coming back. And I know you talk about this, that even the emotional component of it, every emotion has a journey. It's got that beginning, middle, and end.
Well, pain is our best instrument, isn't it, of what we need to listen to. So is what you're saying, first of all, that we can get hooked on the intensity of anxiety, that it gives us this whoosh of feelings, and also there's a sort of hidden message that somehow it's protecting us, it's keeping us safe, it's keeping us alive, that may not even be conscious, because there'll be another voice that is wanting to get rid of the anxiety, hates the anxiety, is attacking ourselves for the anxiety. And I think what you're saying is to recognize, even visualize the anxiety in each of us as maybe a physical being or an object like a pillow. And first of all, understand your relationship with your anxiety. What do you do with it? Do you fight it? Do you trample it? What do you do? Do you try and ignore it? And then your next step, is it to relate to it, to have a conversation like, what are you telling me?
Well, I mean, the premise will be if you treat it like it's the enemy, that's exactly what it becomes. That's the
So it'll go on attacking you.
It's not attacking, but it will feel.
It'll feel like it's attacking
It'll
you.
feel like it's it'll be perceived.
It's an
that way.
important distinction. Yeah.
So the next step then is about the acknowledgement. It's about the willingness to change perspective on that part of self. So rather than see it as the enemy, is there an openness and a willingness that every time you're aware when the anxious self comes forward? And I break it down really clearly in this book. The anxious self will manifest itself in different ways. So sometimes it will manifest physiologically. It will be a strong physiological reaction. And often people miss that. They think, oh, it's got my stomach's in knots or this heaviness in my chest. So they will almost undermine. Ignore it. But actually, so it will manifest either physiologically. The thoughts, of course, are the more obvious, the kind of the what ifs, the catastrophizing, the planning, the predicting, the awfulizing. So it'll present itself.
That's a good word, awfulizing. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah. I make up words.
Yeah, awfulizing. No,
But
I'm going to add that to my lexicon.
It's a good word, isn't it? And then, of course, the emotional state. So anxiety itself, we know what that feels like. But I often say anxiety brings a lot of in-laws with it. You know, it'll bring fear, it'll bring doubt, it'll bring dread. So there are all of these emotions that come along with it. So I guess really...
But it's not just what it brings, it's also what it blocks. So it blocks joy, it blocks spontaneity, it blocks vitality, it blocks probably not quite creativity, but it blocks your openness to experience.
It does, but you know, if I were to argue on the side of anxiety, I would say I'm doing that
to keep you alive.
In blocking that, it will stop you failing, getting it wrong, getting into trouble, getting harmed. So it comes with a very strong... I mean,
it's protecting you from risk.
Yeah, I joke with somebody the other day, and this is not a word of a lie. Like yourself, I do talks and workshops, and I'm on the circuit doing these things. And it's never a natural state for me. There's no part of me that... actually, no. If I'm being honest with myself, I think there's part of me that enjoys performing. There's part of me that enjoys these interviews. There's part of me that enjoys giving talks.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
However, there's a bigger part of me that if I could get out of it and not do it, I would, because actually the risk feels very great. So, if I go back to growing up, a little kid in Belfast, being bullied, being gay, quite frightened, all of my instincts were to stay off radar
Hmm.
and not be seen and not to be found out. And interestingly, every single time I do an event, my anxious self will come out without fail at some point just before I go on to do a gig.
A whoosh of fear.
And something will move in, or the storytelling will begin, which will be, what if you forget what you're going to talk about?
Yeah.
What if I don't like it?
You have a dry or whatever.
Oh my
it's called.
God, Julie is on this event. She's incredible. It will start to do,
Well,
I just watch it go off in different directions. I'm just aware of it. And I'm very aware that if I were to listen to it, then I would say, I'm going to cancel. I'm going to find a reason not to do it. Because shorter term, that would feel incredibly comfortable
Yes, that's
to get
relief.
away from the
Yeah.
discomfort. So I'm so used to it and I'm so familiar with it. And I so recognize that it's a helpful part of me that just jumps in to double check, are we okay?
So is it the observing adult that talks to the anxious part?
Yeah.
So
I'm not-
befriends the anxious part.
I do a chapter on energy, which is a weird thing for a therapist to talk about. But I do
Not
believe,
really. We need energy, right?
I think our energy states change the whole time. And if we're not aware of the changes that occur, then we end up again getting quite hooked on some of these patterns. So we either get hooked on the old stuff because the old stuff will help justify the anxiety.
Right.
So the old attachment to story will help justify the
I'm not
present.
good enough. That kind
I'm
of.
not good enough. That happened. This happened
I'm
before.
stupid. Yeah.
This is not safe. All of that stuff.
Mm.
So energy will often then backtrack, and it will look for past information to try and support why things may not be safe. And that can create a change in energy. So very often when I see people who are highly anxious and are in that highly energized, anxious state, what you often discover is that they're highly connected to what's been before.
So by energy, because it sounds a bit like you're saying narrative.
So that would be the kind of the top line of the story. But I think beneath that, when I talk about energies, I talk about that's this kind of core essence of what goes on within someone. And I think there's either clinging, so it's kind of holding on to the old stuff.
Okay,
or,
that's a good word.
Or resisting what's coming next. What if I don't cope with that? What if I don't manage? What if it goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I get humiliated? What if I don't cope? What if I don't function? So I think there is this kind of state. So if you think about what might happen for people, particularly with anxiety, they can end up getting locked in either state. So they can either get locked in attachment to the story and holding on to all of these old
Clinging
patterns.
on or resisting.
Yeah. Or they can swing between. But if you look at then what then happens, the one thing anxious people are often not is present. And that's where I talk about the energy. So this is where I talk about this natural flow, because our natural state is to be here. Because that's our natural state of order. That's our state of equilibrium. So I guess for me, the reason I included this chapter was to help people see that if these energy channels are being blocked and these states of flow. So I guess that state of flow for me is that part within us that contains
It's
that
alive and natural and
strong, natural,
vital,
connected, safe, rational. And that's there within every single one of us. You have it, I have it, every person listening to the podcast. We all have this kind of essence within us that knows what to do, that can protect, that can guard, that can love, all of these things. It's there all of the time. But I guess so much rubbish gets dumped on top
that you lose the natural flow.
So that natural energetic state, when it comes to anxiety, it's really important to be aware. Where am I at?
So if we go to the sort of nutshell version of your book, and the people need to read the book to fully understand it. And I've read the book and it's a great book.
Thank you.
What I've understood is we can't fight and resist anxiety. We can't get rid of anxiety. That we need to shift our relationship with anxiety to recognize it's a useful part of us. And sometimes it has a place. And that we need to recognize what our particular pattern is. Are we resisting? Are we clinging on? What the story we tell ourselves? And then the sort of mindset shift is going internally to our energy and being present within ourselves. What have I missed? I can see you nodding away. I've missed
No,
something.
I think in a nutshell, I mean, most of anxiety is externalized, isn't it? So it's what's going on in the thoughts, it's what's going on in the emotional state, which then gets transferred out into the world, into other people, the behaviors, and mostly the behaviors that are employed around anxiety, drinking too much,
OCD or
drugs,
okay, yeah,
the things that we do, even if
yeah.
and I'll play it in different ways, but the behaviors that we employ to try and not feel anxious, they all very much become externalized. When I sit down with anyone, I do this every single session I work with somebody. And when I say, when we're thinking about your anxiety, what is it you want to do? And every single time in different language I will get is, I just want to get rid of it. And I think then that's where I really strongly think, well, that's not where we're going. That's what we're not going to do. That's never going to help, because look, I think there's a lot of bullshit goes on around promising people heal your anxiety forever. I mean, you're going to have your anxious self with you for the rest of your life. It is not going anywhere, and it has to be there. That's a natural part of the human condition. So I guess for me, it's look, you're going to live with this part of self for the rest of your life. So you might as well get to know it. You might as well form a healthy relationship with it. You might as well become the expert. Whatever your story is, it will have functioned in a particular way that probably was part of your survival.
Yeah. So it was useful.
At a given
like
time.
addiction. The first thing with addiction is that it was the only thing you had available to survive at the time.
Exactly. So the big challenge now is a willingness to go the other direction. And instead of holding on to and staying attached to these addictive patterns that you've perhaps got involved in, whether that's thought, emotion, behavior, how you treat your anxiety, how you deal with it, relying on your anxiety, we go a totally, totally different route. And I guess that's what the book does. It's kind of like, well, what does that look like? How do we manage these thoughts differently? Not just replace it with an alternative. I think if it were that easy, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah.
So how do
and we
you do
wouldn't
that?
have such high states of anxiety if you want.
Exactly. How do we navigate these emotions that come in that can sometimes feel like a tidal wave? How can you genuinely get comfortable in a state that feels overwhelming? And you can. So how, it's about how can you go towards that safely and comfortably? So I guess the entire book is about going the opposite direction.
It's not cutting off and getting rid of. It's walking towards and connecting with and befriending.
And unapologetically.
Unapologetically. And not with fear.
Yeah. Well, I think that will come,
with love and compassion, maybe.
I mean, fear is probably the natural state for most people to go towards anything new. Love and compassion, I think at the beginning, could be a massive big ask.
Yes, too far. Okay.
So I would say just go towards it with openness to possibilities, curiosity.
Yes,
that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I love the word curiosity because it doesn't promise anything.
And possibility doesn't either.
But I just think, look, just give me a chance here, or hear me out, give this a shot. And I think I do the same in therapy. And
you kind of practice it. Is it then a practice?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, this becomes a way of life.
Yeah.
And I think the entire book, I mean, what I've tried to do is deconstruct all of these parts of the anxious self. The first block of the book is about getting to know the anxious self and really, not only getting to know, but how do you move towards and what does that look like?
Yeah,
and then it's okay. Now let's teach you to become the expert in this part of yourself so that you can spot
when it's ignited, when it's on.
And how addicted you've got. The only part of addiction that I go the other direction with, and look, I'm under no illusions. Addiction specialists will be arguing, saying, anxiety is not an addiction. And I have never said that anxiety is an addiction anywhere in the book. What I have said is that the process of anxiety is addictive. And I said that throughout the book. It's linguistics, but the process of anxiety is anxiety in itself, it's a mechanism, it's there, but we get addicted to the process and we hook on to that. The only part of the addiction world that I wouldn't agree with is addiction kind of 12-step programs and stuff talk about you are powerless. And that's the only one area in the whole addiction thinking where I've gone the other way. And I said, actually, that's the one part I don't agree with. I don't think you are powerless. I think there's that part of you that has a lot of power over your anxiety.
I agree. I mean, I guess the thing I like about the powerless is that awful kind of seeking control, over control can drive you nuts. So in some ways, the bit of powerlessness that I think would be useful to anxiety is it's part of befriending it. I am always going to have anxiety. So kind of let God and let go.
I see entirely where you're going. I think for me, and I really thought this through, like I really anguished over this part of the book because I hear exactly what you're saying and I agree to your point. I think for me is that anxiety can be such a strong, dominant, forceful factor. I mean, you got to remember here, when anxiety plays out, it sometimes goes the life and death route.
Yeah, no, it can be
If you don't go
very
this way,
damaging.
if you don't
No.
listen to me, something terrible is going to happen.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
know that from our clients who
No.
have got
Yeah,
OCD
yeah.
or severe
And
anxiety.
suicidal ideation.
All of that stuff, it can be very strong, very, very dominant. And I think in the context of this work, it's the recognition it may feel stronger and it might sound stronger, but actually you are stronger.
Yes, I see that. Yeah.
It's
It's
like
to
the
kind of
word,
recognize that you can be stronger than the addiction is important. A sense
yeah,
of agency and advocacy for yourself, that
yeah,
you're not this victim of it.
yeah. That's the point. So it's not about feeling, oh my God, I'm completely at the mercy of my anxiety
Yeah.
and I'm victimized by it. Because I think it's almost like if you're dealing with a child who needs boundaries and you can be compassionate and loving, but sometimes you've got to be quite tough. We know this as
Yeah.
therapists. I mean, it can't be all sweet and lovely and light.
No.
Sometimes it has to be really direct. And I think when we're working with our anxious self, there are moments we need to say, okay,
Yeah.
I really need you to step back.
I imagine that your anxious self is kicking off with the publication of a book.
Oh,
Big
on
time. On
hyperdrive.
steroids. Yeah.
It's off a scale, and it always is. So this is my
Yeah.
fourth book.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think it's a privileged opportunity. Of all four, actually, it's the one where I felt I had to dig deeper. I had to soul search a lot more, and I really
It's your
did.
most personal book, maybe?
It probably is, and I guess really it's when you've walked that walk of knowing what it can feel like. The freeing thing about this book has been I'm pretty confident, not in an arrogant way, but I'm confident about what I've done with it and I'm confident about what I'm saying and I believe in what I'm saying. I'm genuinely okay with any anxiety about the book coming out. It isn't about the book in itself.
What's it about?
It's just the exposure, you know, I think any moment of putting yourself out there,
It's
just for
risky.
me, always just creates that initial, you don't want to let people down. You don't want to let your publisher down. You want to do the best possible job. So there's that natural stuff going on. But it's really interesting this time around is that even though I'm aware of it, it's hyped up and it's knocking around in the background, quite active. I'm also aware that I believe in this book and I've trusted myself and it feels like it flowed very naturally.
It came out
So
of you naturally.
it did actually. And I think when we were
Nice.
talking about energy earlier, part of me has to let that go and trust it. The book will end up where it needs to end.
We have no control. I mean, we can influence by showing up, speaking our truth and kind of representing the book. Yeah.
That's kind of where I am with it. So I guess over the years, I mean, I think I've got much better becoming more unaddicted to my own anxiety
In
process.
control. You've proofed, you've edited, you've chosen the cover. It's now in the hands, of the publisher and the press to get it out in the world and into the hands of readers. And I hope a lot of people listening to this podcast will put it in their hands. So where can people find you, Owen? You're on Instagram as...
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a technical dinosaur, but I can probably most present on Instagram these days, and I try and create some content on the books out. And I'm around. I tend to show up at stuff. I show up in podcasts and festivals and various bits and pieces.
So where can people find if they want to meet you and go to an event? Have you got a website?
I have a website. Yeah, I do. So I do anxiety workshops and stuff online.
Okay, so I
The
think
website
that's really important. People know
So
that
I'm
you
not good at selling myself. I'd never be a
useless.
good, I'd never be a
Absolutely useless.
Oh,
I have
see,
to dig it out of you.
I know. I get really weird. When my publisher or anyone asks me to do a video, you know, promoting the book,
Mm.
it can take me an hour
To
to
do
do
30 seconds.
just to do a 30-second, oh, come and buy my book. Whereas actually, if someone says to me, do a couple of minute video on anxiety or processes, I'll bang it out, no problem at all. But if somebody asks me to
To
sell
sell
myself,
something. Well, it is a
I get a bit,
different thing. It is
I
a
get a bit
different
shy.
thing.
And yeah, I'm not entirely comfortable with it, but the website is owenokane.com and all the
Okay. And they
details on
can
my
find
product.
your workshops there.
You can find workshops and books
And
and
you
things.
and I are doing a project that's secret at the moment because I
Secret
asked and we're
where
not
we
allowed to
are.
tell anybody.
Yeah,
But that'll be coming out in May,
very exciting.
which is exciting and also very scary.
Exciting and scary. And it's weird, isn't it? Or sometimes your paths can cross with someone that you just end up on similar projects and having these conversations. That always in life surprises me.
And
That
is a delight. I'm so glad to have met you. And
I know,
I'm
like,
glad to have read your book. It's really helpful.
thank you for bringing me on your podcast. And yeah, and it's good being part of this project with you as well.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Julia.